I was just grabbing a drink at the company party when I saw her, my wife, Erin, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the laugh that caught me off guard. It was the hand on her lower back. The same hand that belonged to my department manager, Alan. She didn't see me at first. They were tucked in the corner of the rooftop bar we'd rented out for our year-end celebration. Everyone was half lit, letting loose after a brutal fourth quarter. But I was sober. I always was at these things. You don't climb to regional director without keeping your head straight. I watched her for a moment longer, hoping, praying that I was misreading something, that maybe Alan's hand had landed there by accident, that the way she leaned into him, smiled up like a schoolgirl, was just a side effect of too much wine and bad music. But then she turned and kissed him. Not a peck, not a drunken mistake. A kiss that meant something. A kiss I hadn't gotten from her in over a year. I left before they could see me. Didn't make a scene, didn't even take the drink I'd come for. I just walked to the elevator, wrote it down in silence, and sat in my car for 20 minutes staring at the steering wheel. My name's David. I'm 41, been in corporate logistics since I left the Army at 24. I've always been the reliable one, in my job, in my marriage, in everything. Erin and I met when I was stationed in Fort Hood. She was studying nursing. I remember thinking how focused she was, how driven. She's now 39, an ER nurse supervisor, respected by everyone who knows her, or at least who thinks they know her. That night I drove home without saying a word to anyone. When Erin walked in 2 hours later, her lipstick a little smudged, heels in her hand, she gave me a tired smile and said the party had run long. I nodded, said nothing. It's strange the moment betrayal hits. It doesn't scream, it doesn't rage. It settles, like a heavy fog. You don't cry, you don't shout, you just sit with it, let it sink into your bones. She had no idea I'd seen her, and I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. Not yet. But that night marked a line, before and after, trust and truth. And, quietly, I began to watch. Listen. Wait. Because something inside me had shifted. And I knew, whatever was coming next, I wouldn't be the one left broken. It wasn't always like this. Erin and I built something real once, something worth protecting. We met young, and maybe that was part of the problem. I was 24, fresh out of a deployment, still figuring out how to fit back into the world. She was 22, bright-eyed, and already more mature than most people twice her age. We got married fast. Everyone said it wouldn't last, but we worked hard. I took a logistics job at a mid-sized firm and moved up through the ranks the slow way. Early mornings, late nights, no vacations that weren't tied to some conference. Erin finished nursing school, started doing overnight shifts to help pay off our loans. For years, our lives were synced like gears in a well-run machine. The house came 6 years in. A modest 2-story in the suburbs with a patchy lawn and many stairs. We never had kids, not for lack of trying. 3 miscarriages left us both exhausted, and eventually, we stopped talking about it. Erin buried herself in the hospital. I buried myself in work. We told ourselves it was fine, that not every story needed children to be complete. I believed that. Or at least I wanted to. The red flags started small. Missed calls, weekend shifts that didn't make sense. A new perfume, she said, was a gift from a coworker. I chalked it up to stress. God knows nursing had become hell after the pandemic. I told myself to trust her, that we'd earned that much from each other. But the distance grew. We'd sit at dinner and barely talk. Her phone was always face down on silent. When I'd ask how work was going, she'd shrug and say, "Same old chaos." No details. No stories. Erin used to come home with wild tales from the ER. Now it was just silence. At work, things weren't much better. Alan, my department manager, the same man I saw with Erin, had recently transferred from corporate. We'd gotten along at first, but it quickly became clear he had his own agenda. Meetings were rescheduled without me. Reports I used to approve were suddenly routed through him. My name started to disappear from email threads. Still, I didn't connect the dots. I thought, maybe I was slipping. Maybe the younger guys were faster, sharper, maybe I was just getting old. One night, about a month before the party, Erin came home later than usual. I was already in bed, lights off, pretending to sleep. I heard her in the kitchen whispering, soft laughter, the click of her phone camera. I got up the next morning and checked our security footage from the front door. She'd turned it off before coming in. That should have been the moment I confronted her. But I didn't. I wasn't ready to see it, to say it out loud. Instead, I bought flowers that weekend, cooked dinner, tried to bring her back. She barely touched her plate. "You okay?" I asked. "Just tired," she said. So I nodded again, just like always. I'd spent nearly 2 decades building a life on loyalty, on showing up, at work, in marriage, in every damn corner of my world. And somewhere along the line, I'd started disappearing from my own story. They didn't take everything from me in one go. They chipped away slowly, smile by lie, shift by silence, and now I was starting to feel the cracks. The first real shift came 3 weeks after the party. Alan started holding strategy syncs without inviting me. These were meetings I used to run. Suddenly, I was asked to submit updates to someone 2 rungs below me. My responsibilities weren't reassigned. They were just quietly absorbed. Tasks I had overseen for years started moving through different hands. No announcement, no explanation. I tried brushing it off, telling myself it was a company-wide restructuring. But when I finally asked Alan directly, he smiled that corporate smile, tight, meaningless, and said, "We're just experimenting with workflow distribution, David. Nothing permanent." Then he patted me on the back. I knew that move. I'd used it on underperformers I didn't have the heart to fire yet. From that day on, my access began to shrink. I couldn't log into certain reports I used to generate. When I asked IT, they said the permissions had been changed by upper management. My badge wouldn't let me into 2 wings of the office. HR meetings were suddenly booked on my calendar without any clear agenda. And Erin? She grew colder, quieter. Every night was an excuse. Too tired, too stressed, late shift. I started, sleeping in the guest room just to avoid the tension. But the moment everything came into focus was a Friday morning. I'd stopped at a local cafe near Erin's hospital to grab her favorite, hazelnut latte with oat milk. I hadn't done something like that in a while, and maybe part of me hoped it would open a door between us again. As I pulled into the lot, I saw her, Erin standing by her car. Alan was with her. They weren't touching, nothing overt, but the closeness, the comfort, it was unmistakable. He handed her something, a folded envelope. She looked around nervously, then slid it into her bag. I didn't confront her. I just left the coffee in the cup holder and drove to work in silence. That weekend, while she worked a double, I went through her old phone, the one she'd left in the closet after upgrading. I hadn't touched her things in years. It felt wrong even as I did it, but what I found made everything feel right. Messages, photos, voice notes. Some were old, some recent. All from Alan. They'd started as work-related, then drifted. Late-night chats, inside jokes, photos from company events, then pictures of them together. Always subtle, never overt, but enough. One message from 2 months ago hit me harder than the rest. "Wish you could have come to Chicago. Would have been easier to sleep with you in my arms instead of my head." I sat on the floor of the closet for an hour, just holding that old phone, breathing slow and steady like I was back in a deployment zone. She wasn't just cheating, she was cheating with my boss. And they weren't just having an affair. They were planning something bigger. I thought about the envelope, the meetings I was being excluded from, the way Alan had slowly cut off my influence at work. This wasn't just about love or lust. This was a takedown. I wasn't naive anymore. Whatever game they were playing, I was now awake, and I was going to learn the rules. The final blow didn't come with a bang. It came with a calendar invite. Subject line, one-on-one, organizational realignment discussion. I knew what that meant. I showed up to the glass-walled conference room 5 minutes early, still in my usual pressed shirt and tie, coffee in hand. I sat in the same chair I'd used for performance reviews I used to give. Now, the power dynamics had flipped. Alan walked in, flanked by a junior HR rep I barely recognized. He didn't even pretend to warm it up. "David," he said, sitting down, "we're making some tough calls this quarter. Unfortunately, your position has been selected for elimination due to restructuring. Effective immediately. No thank you for your years." No acknowledgement of the contracts I secured, the teams I built, the nights I stayed late when everyone else went home. Just a generic HR line about severance and a thin blue folder slid across the table. I didn't argue. Didn't beg, just stared at him, at the man who had taken my trust, my career, and, as I now suspected, my wife. "I assume you've planned this well?" I said quietly. Alan blinked. "Excuse me?" I stood up, smoothing my tie. "Nothing. Best of luck." The HR girl exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath. I left my badge and laptop on the table and walked out without looking back. The key card I kept on my belt, 3 years of habit, I slid into my pocket instead of handing over. I don't know why. Maybe it felt like a piece of my identity I wasn't ready to give away. When I got home, Erin wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. I sat in the kitchen with a glass of water, staring at the fridge, where our last photo, together, was pinned. Our anniversary in Asheville. She was smiling in that picture. I wasn't. When she came home that night, she looked at me and immediately knew something had changed. "What happened?" "I got laid off," I said. "Alan gave me the news." She looked surprised, almost too surprised. "Oh my God. I had no idea," she said, moving to touch my arm. I pulled away. "You sure you didn't?" She froze. It was the first moment she knew I knew, but I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just walked past her, went into the guest room, and shut the door. No door slams, no shouting matches, just silence. Let them think it was over, that I was the broken one, that I'd lost. Because what they didn't realize was, I still had everything I needed. Access, memories, patterns. And silence is a powerful thing when used right. I didn't do anything dramatic. No late-night calls, no dramatic confrontations. I just started watching. For 2 weeks, I woke up at the same time I always had, dressed like I was still heading to the office, and went somewhere else, a library, a park bench, sometimes a corner booth at the diner down the street. My phone stayed silent, my calendar blank, but I took notes, lots of them. Every message, every file, every pattern I could remember from work, I mapped it out. You'd be surprised how much you retain after nearly 2 decades in logistics. Every contract clause, every vendor handshake, every quiet NDA violation Alan had slipped through because I looked the other way. And now, I wasn't looking away. The keycard I hadn't turned in still worked. One night past 9 p.m., I drove to the office, used the loading dock entrance, and walked straight to the records room. No cameras in there. They'd never updated the system since moving to digital. I knew that because I approved the last budget. Request. Inside, I pulled every vendor contract Alan had touched in the last 18 months, photocopied them, took photos with my burner phone, labeled them by date. I wasn't stealing. I was documenting. I needed a map, a timeline, proof that this wasn't just personal, it was professional, and I found it. Alan had pushed through a series of vendor consolidations that rerouted payments through a shell company in Illinois. On paper, it looked like cost-cutting, but the shell company? Registered to a consulting firm Erin's cousin owned, one she'd helped launch on paper the year prior. It all clicked. Erin and Alan weren't just having an affair. They were siphoning funds, slowly, smartly, laundering vendor payments through a fake firm. I'd been the only one who ever pushed back on vendor changes, and once I was gone, Alan had a clear runway. They weren't expecting me to keep looking. I backed everything up twice, one copy on an encrypted flash drive, the other in a cloud folder tied to a burner Gmail account. Then I started planting seeds. Anonymously, I forwarded one flagged contract to the company's internal audit team using the whistleblower hotline. No accusations. Just, you may want to verify vendor OR687's address against internal registration protocols. 3 days later, internal audit opened a case. I knew this because my former assistant texted me. Weird vibe at the office. Audit teams, here digging through finance stuff. Alan looks like he's aged 5 years in a day. I smiled for the first time in weeks. All legal. All clean. All traceable to marital concerns and lack of transparency, as the lawyer phrased it. I also recorded every conversation we had in the house after that. Texas is a one-party consent state. I made sure the voice recorder sat right on the table, blinking red every time she made some vague excuse or slipped in a bitter insult. I wasn't planning revenge. I was setting the foundation. Because the difference between anger and strategy is timing, and mine was almost perfect. It started unraveling faster than I expected. 2 weeks after the audit team got involved, Alan was put on administrative leave pending investigation. That was the phrasing in the memo sent to all employees. Of course, my old coworkers texted me the second it went out. I didn't respond. I just watched. Erin came home that night in a panic. She dropped her purse on the kitchen floor and stood in the doorway staring at me like I held the trigger to a bomb. They suspended Alan, she said. I kept my voice calm. Yeah? They're saying it's fraud. Vendor fraud. Someone tipped them off. I raised an eyebrow. Strange. Must have been a mistake. She studied me. Hard. For the first time I saw it. Fear, raw and unfamiliar, flickering in her eyes. That same week I filed for divorce. Quietly. My lawyer served her the papers while she was on shift at the hospital. She came home fuming, waving them in the air like a threat. You think this is how you solve things? She shouted. No, I said, standing in the doorway calm. This is how I end them. She left for her sister's place that night, never asked for a conversation, never apologized. Maybe she thought the money would still be there, that the house would still be ours. But I'd already made sure everything was separated, documented, and routed through legal channels she couldn't touch. My name had been scrubbed off our shared credit lines, the utilities rerouted, even the mortgage prepped for assumption under a new ownership clause. A week later, the media got wind of the investigation. The local business blog ran a short piece. Regional logistics firm probes internal vendor fraud. Exec on leave. It wasn't front-page news, but it was loud enough to draw attention. Alan's name was in the third paragraph. I made sure of that. A journalist I used to coach at a community mentorship program owed me a favor. I gave her just enough to piece the story together without pointing it back to me. 3 days later, Alan's wife filed for divorce. She'd found out about the affair and the money trail the same way I had, quietly, painfully. Erin tried to reach me then. Left 3 voicemails. Texted long messages about regret and not understanding how things got this far. I didn't respond. The company released a formal statement about unethical behavior discovered during a routine audit. Alan was terminated. His name removed from all company documents. And just like that, the man who tried to erase me from the company was erased himself. Erin didn't survive it either. Her cousin's consulting firm was subpoenaed. Once her name came up in connection to vendor approvals, the hospital opened an internal review. She was placed on leave pending the outcome. Everything they built, together behind my back, burned to the ground, and I never raised my voice once. I never touched a single thing that wasn't mine. I just let the truth speak. The collapse was slow, public, humiliating, and I stayed silent, calm, watching from the very seat they once tried to shove me out of. That's the thing about quiet men. We don't roar. We wait, and when we move, it's already too late for you to run. It's been 7 months since the last time I saw Erin in person. She signed the divorce papers without a word. No fight, no appeal. I think she knew there was nothing left to save. Or maybe she finally realized the version of me she thought she could manipulate was gone. The house is quieter now. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache. I got a new job. Smaller. Company, fewer perks, but the team actually values experience. No politics, no Alan. Just honest work. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the key card from my old job. I never turned it in. It sits in my desk drawer right next to the flash drive where I stored all the evidence. I don't look at them much. Just knowing they're there is enough. I don't hate her. That's what surprises people. It's not hate that lingers. It's the grief of being wrong about someone for so long, of giving years to a version of love that wasn't returned the same way. But I don't carry that grief anymore. I left it behind, same as the badge, same as her. Sometimes when I walk past the mirror, I don't recognize myself, not because I look different, but because for the first time in a long time, I look free. Free from pretending. Free from trying to save something that wasn't worth the effort. She once told me, "Loyalty is currency." I spent mine on her. She cashed it out for quick power and backroom deals. And in the end, she lost everything. I gained peace. No headlines. No explosions. Just silence and a clean exit.